What's your dream shop look like? Is it a separate building, maybe 16 by 32 feet, hardwood flooring? Of course, we'd have to have it heated for working in the winter and cooled for working in the summer. If you're like me, you've got maybe your basement to work with or one half of a two-car garage. In my case, I chose to use the basement. It's a little unhandy to get materials in and out of, but I like it because the basement is warm in the winter and it's always cool in the summer. I do have a problem getting materials in and out. I have to haul my lumber through the living room and down the stairs and to the shop. Now for long stock, I slide those through the windows, so that's my solution for a woodworking shop. The shop that we're talking about is 26 foot long by 12 feet wide, roughly the size of half of a two-car garage. My shop happens to have a little bonus area down in the right-hand corner. I use that for storage, but for the planning today, we will ignore that area. Since it demands the most space to operate, let's start with the table saw. For the small shop, I've found placing the right end of the saw against a wall seems to be the most efficient. Not only do you have to plan for the amount of space that the saw takes up, but for the amount of space it takes to operate that saw. For example, to rip a sheet of plywood, you have to have at least 8 feet in front of the saw for you and the plywood. Now we'll go ahead and rip the plywood, and as you can see, you have to have at least 8 feet behind the saw. So that makes a pretty large space that you have to deal with in the planning. The area shown in red is the actual amount of space for a table saw to operate. As we continue our planning, we have to keep clear of this area. That keep clear area will be much larger if you use your table saw for cross-cutting plywood. The most common tool for cross-cutting lumber is the miter saw. As you can see, we've placed the miter saw outside of the table saw's keep clear area. One strategy for saving space is to overlap your work. In this case, the miter saw's work surface is higher than the table saw, allowing a board to extend over the top of the table saw. One other space saver is to use the same surfaces for different equipment. In the left-hand outfeed is a good place to mount a router table. Another tool that takes a lot of space to operate is the thicknessing planer. As you can see, the planer here is mounted on a base that has roll-around casters. Since the planer is mobile, let's place it here while we are using it. Okay, I've placed it in the keep clear zone, but it's only there when we're planing stock. When we're done, we'll move the planer out of the way. Again, we need to allow space for the planer to operate. One of the secrets to making this planer work is the same as the miter saw. The planer outfeed is higher than the surface of the table saw. So when we plane a board, the wood actually extends out over the table saw, saving a ton of space. Okay, let's go ahead and park the planer against the wall. The fact that the planer is on wheels is key to making our small shop work. Here's an example of a mobile base on a table saw. It allows me to move the table saw around as needed. You can also make your own mobile bases using 1x4s, angle iron, and some casters. Placing as many of your stationary tools on mobile base will increase the flexibility of your workshop greatly. Next, we'll bring the workbench into the shop. Again, we want to make sure that the workbench is clear of that table saw's work area. Avoid benches with recessed trays. It's just a place to pile stuff that gets in your way later. I like to have a wall bench nearby, and that gives me a place to put things when I'm working on my projects out of the way of my work. Okay, let's continue locating the rest of our tools in the shop. I decided to locate my drill press along the left end of my bench. Mine is on a mobile base, so I can move it out to work on long stock. One thing that you have to remember though, drill presses are very top heavy, so when they're on a mobile base, you want to be careful when you're moving them around. Next we'll move to the sanders. I found an old cabinet that I mounted casters on so I can move it around. It made a perfect spot to mount my sanders on. One is the disc strip sander. The other is an oscillating drum sander. And not wanting to waste space, I had room for a small metal cutting bandsaw. The thing I like about this little bandsaw that I can safely cut small parts very accurately and it doesn't splinter things as I'm cutting them. Plus it's super handy for cutting metal pieces as well as cutting bolts and screws and things to length. I located my mobile sanding center near the workbench. I also located a 6x48 stationary sander in that same area. Since I can't put all of my stationary tools in the same area, I located the bandsaw where it's out of the work area of the table saw. It's on a mobile base so I can move it around as need be. Next, I put my scroll saw in the corner, remembering that I need to keep it out of the way of the table saw's operation. It works in the corner pretty well because I'm generally using very small parts when I'm cutting on the scroll saw. And since I enjoy wood turning, I needed a place for my lathe. And since it doesn't stick out very far, it doesn't really interfere with any of my other woodworking activities. The next tool that I want to locate is the jointer. I located the jointer next to the lathe at an angle so I'd have clearance to run long stock. And I want to locate it where it was fairly close to the table saw because many of the operations include the table saw and the joiner working together, where you rip a board, joint the edge, rip another board, joint the edge. So it was important to have those tools close together. Next, I located my air compressor out of the way next to the table saw along the wall. And finally, I located my shop vac next to the miter saw where it was handy to roll out to my workbench to connect to my portable power tools. Okay, I've used up most of my floor space, so now it's time to start filling up the walls.